now let's get to Plato and Aristotle. Those are towering figures in philosophy. Midwife of ideas. Yes. Okay. Plato and Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle are two towering figures in Western philosophy. In fact, you may say that the entire philosophy rests on them. And remember that the periods we were talking about at the beginning, we enter in systematic period. Why? Because both of them had a system. Both of them had a whole system explaining everything and kind of tying it all together. Before we see one philosopher saying some things about how the universe works, another philosopher talking about something else. Now, both of them actually came up with a very, very complete explanation of rules of the universe, how do we know things, and also morality, how should we live and why. So everything is there, all the elements. Now, this is the famous fresco from Sistine Chapel in Vatican. This is just part of it. It's actually rather large. These are all the philosophers, but these two are in the front. You can see them right away. This is Plato and this is Aristotle. And the distinguishing characteristic, Plato points towards the sky. As hopefully you guys will see why when we talk about them. Aristotle kind of points towards the earth. He is more grounded, whereas Plato is more about the above. Both of them, however, are very important. We'll spend the week, this week on Plato and the next week on Aristotle, 2 lectures on Plato, 2 on Aristotle. This is by no means enough to properly talk about their philosophy. I would say you need at least a year for Plato and a year for Aristotle, but of course we don't have that kind of time. Well, no, this is the Plato. Hand, you mean hand? Head in the sky, hand towards the sky. That's the Plato. This is Plato, this is Aristotle. Yes. Alright. So Plato. First, Plato. He was, of course, the student of Socrates, as we talked about before. He was born around 428, 427. When Socrates was executed, therefore, he was about 28 years old. Something like this. He was with Socrates from the age of 20, so for about 7-8 years. He was following Socrates just like all these other youths, listening to him. He loved him as a teacher. All of them adored him and was devastated by his death. Plato also, like many of those young people who followed Socrates, was from a very noble, wealthy family. One of the top families in Athens. He was groomed to become political leader. He was meant to become a leader of the country. His uncle was actually one of the 30 tyrants who were ruling Athens during this short period of time after the war, when they, instead of democracy, they had tyrants, 30 tyrants in charge of the country for a couple of years. Not very long time, then they were all kind of overthrown. But his uncle was one of those tyrants, which already tells you, he is not your regular Joe. He was supposed to become not a philosopher, but the leader. However, he loved philosophy so much, and he was so impressed by Socrates that he abandoned this entire thing. After Socrates' death, he left Athens. He traveled for a few years. We know that he probably went to southern Italy. And if you remember southern Italy, this is where Pythagoreans and also Eleatics were, and he learned some of their ideas. He learned about mathematics in particular. That was probably something he picked up from the Pythagoreans, that mathematics is somehow related to the entire reality, and also the idea of eternal soul, the soul living forever and just transferring from person to person, or from animal to person, or from person to animal, and so on. These ideas are probably something he picked up after Socrates, not from Socrates, but they will become big part of his philosophy. When he came back to Athens, and he did come back a few years later, he founded the so-called academy. And the word academy, we use it today all the time, right? You heard the word academy. And we connect it immediately with higher education. But that's because of Plato. It actually is kind of a coincidence that the word was picked up, because his academy was located in a garden of dedicated to the Greek hero Academius. And that's why it was called academy, because it was located there. But Academius himself had nothing to do with education, as far as we know. It's just because of the Plato's institution being located in his garden that we picked up this word academy, and up until today we say, no, he attended the academy, or he is an academic. But that is why. This is where the word comes from. Aristotle, by the way, was one of his students. We know a lot of things about Plato and Socrates also from Aristotle, as we will mention later. He died around 348, 347, so 80 years old, fairly long life. This is, of course, his depiction as we have it from the statue. You can see some similarity with this picture, don't you? At least the beard, a little bit similar. Of course, this was painting made many centuries after he died. However, this is a copy made probably around the time when he was still alive. So this is more like the way he actually looked like. Okay, so this is a brief history of Plato. Now, his famous dialogues. We actually are fairly confident that we have all of them, because there's no mention of any dialogues which we do not possess in any of the sources. Therefore, we probably have all of them, 42 dialogues. There's also 13 letters. Some of them we are not sure whether they are authentic. Scholars disagree on that. They may have been forged later on. Whether or not they are written as if they are letters from Plato, but whether or not he actually himself wrote them or somebody else did, we don't know. If he wrote them, then we can know a lot of things about his life from his own words, but that is, like I said, not for sure. And there are disagreements about this. It was too long ago for us to be sure about many of these things. All these dialogues are leading to some sort of a solution of a particular problem, or they sometimes end in aporia. Aporia is basically when you have no result. It's just a dead end. And some of his dialogues do not reach any result. They just pose the problem, then there's this dialogue, and eventually it turns out that all the definitions given are not good ones. Now, how do we know they're authentic? What do we have? Just a few words about this. It's actually kind of interesting. Where do we get all this? Because students often wonder. It's been, 2,400 roughly years. How are we sure that that's actually his work and that text? So we do not have any of his handwritten manuscripts. Nothing written by Plato himself survived. It was there for many centuries. His work he did actually write it, but it was lost. In fact, we have some fragments from 3rd century BC, which would be roughly 100 years after he died. Still within, his time, but already after. And those are only fragments. This is not complete work. We have fairly complete manuscripts of his dialogues from the 9th century. 2 copies, in fact. The most famous copies, one of them is in Paris, and for this reason it's called Parisianus, Latin for the Parisian. And the other one is in Oxford, and it's called Bodleianus because it's in Bodleian Library. So this is how scholars typically refer to them, Parisianus and Bodleianus. 9th century our time, meaning that was roughly 1100 years ago. And again, more than 1200 years after Plato himself wrote it. So those are only copies. Let's look at some of this stuff. This is actually interesting pictures of it. So this is a small fragment we have from the 3rd century BC, papyrus copy of one of his dialogues, Phaedo. This is all we have, this little chunk. We don't have the entire thing. We have this chunk, and it has the writing on it. You see, this is all that survived. This is a transcription. Note that they actually did not make any breaks between words. That's how they were writing at the time. It's like one long word and that's it. They were just reading it like this. They were not, there were no capital letters, there were no periods, there were no punctuation whatsoever. It's just one long word. You can, of course, if you know the language, you can determine which word ends and which begins, but it can be a little confusing. And this is, again, roughly 100 years after Plato died. So within his time frame, 2,300 years ago, but again, not by Plato himself, probably a copy, but a copy from his original writing. Now, this is from Bodleianus, from this manuscript, which has been made 895 our century, 1125 years ago, and this is the same exact fragment. So this is a complete works. There is I'm not sure if it's all of his dialogues, but majority of his dialogues, handwritten, painstakingly handwritten from some other source, from probably 3rd century source. We can compare them, and we can see that this chunk is actually this fragment here, and the wording is the same. So because of that, we can compare these various fragments, and we can determine that we do indeed have the copy, the very good copy of the original work. But obviously there may also be some differences, like some of the people who are rewriting it could have made some mistakes here and there, right? Sometimes they misread the word, or they misspelled the word, or whatever. That actually creates some lively debates among the scholars about how you're supposed to read a particular work. But because there are several of them, you can compare them. And if it's different in one from the other, you can say, okay, well, if there's a difference here, why is this a difference? Either this guy made a mistake or this guy made a mistake. Which guy made the mistake? But the content is more or less the same. And again, from this 9th century copy, we have modern editions. This is modern edition in Greek. Again, exactly the same fragment, you see, as you saw in the previous two. This is from the book published 1995, only 25 years ago. And of course, it was compared with a variety of different sources to make sure that it is as close to the original as possible. It is in ancient Greek, but this is English translation. This is from English translation by Gallup, published by Oxford 1975. So the reading which you guys have for today, and hopefully you did it, we'll talk about it more, is like that too. This is the first book of the Republic. Again, we obviously don't have the original written by Plato, but we know it's his work, and we have the copy of it from 9th century, and we also have some fragments from much earlier time. We compare them, and we are rather confident that this is how Plato wrote it. This is how it was his original version. Okay. Now, Socrates and Plato. Again, remember that we cannot be sure how much of what Plato talks about Socrates is correct, but like we talked about last time, early dialogues of Plato are more or less faithful to the spirit of Socrates, and which is what we will be mainly talking about today, the part of Plato's philosophy, early philosophy, which was very Socratic. The stuff he immediately picked up from Socrates, probably similar to Socratic ideas. Socrates himself, once again, just as Aristotle confirms, and Aristotle, remember, was a student of Plato. He never met Socrates. He was born after Socrates already was executed. However, he was a student of Plato, who obviously knew Socrates, and he was in the academy in Athens when many people who personally knew Socrates were still alive. So he obviously had conversation with these people, and he obviously knew firsthand about Socrates things which we may not get from Plato. So what does Aristotle tell us? Aristotle tells us that Socrates was concerned with ethical questions, with questions of definition. So what is justice, what is piety, and so on. He was not making any kind of metaphysical assumptions about that, about nature of reality itself and so on. He did not go there. Plato will go there, but not Socrates. First dialogues of Plato are kind of like this, including the one you guys read. This is the first book of the Republic. It probably was written shortly after Socrates' trial, and it probably is more or less showing you how Socrates did these things. In other books of the Republic, Plato will start elaborating on that and bring in his own theory, which we mainly will talk about next time. Now, note that Plato was not the only student of Socrates. There were several other students who actually started their own schools. Cyrenaics, for example. We will talk about post-Aristotelian, post-Platonic philosophy a little bit later, but even for now, some of them became famous for certain sayings and so on, which we'll mention in a second. So, few things now Plato did take from Socrates, and definitely that's what gave his philosophy foundation. One of them is he rejects relativism of the sophists. Remember, the sophists are relativists. They are saying, well, it depends on how human beings look at it. It may be true, it may not be true. Socrates didn't think so. He thought there is such thing as justice, there is such thing as piety, and there is such thing as true knowledge of reality. So Plato also agrees with it. He thinks that there is such thing as truth, there is such thing as true reality, and we can know it and we should know it. However, he also rejects our confidence in sense experience. He's saying external and unchanging knowledge is the only true knowledge. The knowledge which is not relative. What kind of knowledge is not relative? Well, mathematics. That's one of the ideas he will also get from Pythagoreans. 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's not relative. It was true 2,000 years ago. I'm pretty sure it'll be true 2,000 years from now. That doesn't depend on things. What kind of knowledge is relative? Well, pretty much all the knowledge of what we learn through the senses is relative. Like even such things as, is Socrates sitting or is he standing? Suppose there's Socrates in front of you. Is he sitting or standing? Well, you may say, well, at that moment he is definitely sitting. That is true. But no, the problem with it is, when he will stand up, is it still going to be true or not? Things change, right? And Plato would say that things which change cannot be subject to knowledge at all. Because if they are changing, therefore, no, he did. But if he can be sitting and then he can be standing, then you cannot be sure whether he's sitting or standing. Right? That's the kind of a skeptical way to look at it, and skeptics will also pick up from this Socratic kind of idea that this type of knowledge cannot be assured. Because suppose I saw Socrates and he was sitting, and so I go next day and I tell somebody, Socrates was sitting, but another person also saw Socrates and he was standing, and he will say, no, he is standing. He was standing. Note that for us to reach some sort of conclusion will be very difficult, because both of them actually are true. At some point he was sitting, and at another point he was standing. So how do we determine this? Now, of course, you may say, well, we can take a picture or something. Remember, that was not available to them at the time. They couldn't take a picture. So there were plenty of disagreements based on this type of reasoning. And for this reason, many philosophers were rejecting change altogether. Remember Parmenides. Parmenides actually said there is no change. And this is one of the reasons he was giving, because it's impossible. If things are changing, then you cannot know them at all. Then you may even wonder if there is such thing as Socrates. So to Plato, the only true knowledge are knowledge of reality which does not change. And reality which changes, such as whether Socrates is sitting or standing, is not something you can know. Because it will kind of run away from you as soon as you try to catch it. He was also rejecting the idea that knowledge can just be a true belief, because he was saying that knowledge should always be grounded in rational insight, in reasoning. A few of the interesting paradoxes which some of the students of Socrates were later brought to philosophy may be interesting to mention here. Some of them are still kind of unresolved, and you may say in philosophy, the liar paradox, the famous liar paradox. So it goes like this. Somebody says, what I am saying now is a lie. Is this true? What do you think? Yeah, isn't it interesting? Note that the problem here, because if you say it is true, then it is false, because it's a lie. He's saying he is lying. But if it is a lie, then it actually is true. So is it true or is it false? This is a very big problem for philosophy, because we think that every statement can be either true or false. However, this is a type of a statement which on the face of it should be either true or false. Either he is lying or he is not. No, but this is what the man is saying. You're not asking anybody. Suppose I am telling you, what I am saying now is a lie. Okay, so this sentence in itself, is it true or false? I can tell it to you without you even asking anything. I can just make a statement. Well, if it is false, then it is true. And if it is true, then it is false. This is what is known as self-reference, right? It refers to itself. Another version of it is this statement is false. Now, if this statement is false, then this statement is true. And if this statement is true, then this statement is false. Anyway, this is kind of a paradox. And, well, just to give you an idea, in philosophy, in 20th century philosophy, it was decided that no language can talk about itself. You need what is known as meta-language, or language on a different level to talk about this language. Because if language talks about itself, it's kind of endless loop. You cannot determine the truth or falsity here. It just doesn't exist. It can talk about other things, like this event is true or this statement is true, but it cannot talk about itself, like I am the statement which is false, because that will be self-reference. But anyway, whether it resolves it or not, hard to say, but it kind of shows you why they were so puzzled. Another famous paradox, a little bit easier for us to answer today, a masked man. A masked man. It goes kind of like this. A man covered with some sort of a mask or whatever cover is sitting somewhere, and it is a father of a person who's been asked. So they ask him, do you know this masked man? Who is his father, right? But he doesn't know it's his father, so he says, no. And they're saying, but he is your father. So you don't know your father? You see the paradox here. Do you know him? No. But he's your father. Well, obviously the way you can answer it is, well, I know him as my father, but I don't know right now that this is my father. So I know him and I don't know him. But you can see how it could be puzzling to people, because it seems like, again, a paradox. You are saying that you know, and you're saying that you don't know about the same man. It's just, yeah, different meaning of the word to know, in different sense. The Electra paradox is kind of similar to that. And finally, the heap paradox. The heap paradox goes like this. A single grain of sand is not a heap. And yet we know that at some point it will be a heap. So just another version of it. A bald man, right? When is the man bald? We know man with hair, right? Everybody can look at somebody and say, he is not bald. We also know bald man. We can point at him and say, he is bald. But where is the borderline? At which point, like, you wake up one morning, you lose one more hair, and now you are bald. Prior to that, you are not bald, but now you are. Well, yeah, balding, but I mean, if you're balding, you're already kind of bald, aren't you? Is there a line here? It seems like there should be a line. It seems like there should be this clear line between bald and not. Well, if you're 20% bald, you are bald. I mean, bald doesn't necessarily mean have no hair at all. If you have a patch of bald hair, they say you are bald. But then there are people who clearly are not bald in any sense of the word. I'm not calling anybody bald. I'm just saying. Anyway. So this is some of the paradoxes which show you why they also thought that you can't know this type of reality because the words cannot truly describe it. So Plato rejected this kind of relativism of Protagoras. He rejected that man is the measure of all things. No matter which way you look at what it means, single individual man or all men together, he rejected both of them essentially because he thought things are not relative. There are things which are relative, such as, well, for example, does this ice cream taste good? Well, of course, I can say it tastes good, and somebody else can say it's not, because it's just a personal preference, right? But he was saying that there are things which are not like this. There are things such as 2 + 2 = 4, which is not relative, and there are some eternal truths which are not relative, such as what is justice. What is justice to him is not relative from person to person. It's not like all human beings decided to call something justice, and so it's justice. No, justice is actually something real. Beauty, something real. And all these other terms, which is why Socrates was trying to show that there is actually such thing. Plato was saying that some things may be relative, but certainly not all of them. And he also was saying that, in fact, relatives contradict themselves when they claim that their opinion is better than their opponent's, that everything is relative. And this is an interesting part of one of his dialogues when he actually shows the contradiction. So Socrates there says, Protagoras, for his part, admitting as he does that everybody's opinion is true, must acknowledge the truth of his opponent's belief about his belief, where they think he is wrong. And Theodorus says, certainly. And Socrates says, that is to say, he would acknowledge his own belief to be false if he admits that belief of those who think him wrong is true. Do you see the paradox here? So basically it goes like this. If I say all things are relative, the question is this true, which all things are relative? And if I say yes, this is true, all things are relative, then somebody can say, well, but this thing then is not relative, is it? It is true. So there is at least one thing which is not relative. So I contradict myself when I say all things are relative. It can't be all of them if this one is true. Well, something like numbers, but I mean, some people will say there's no such thing as numbers. So that would be their answer. Numbers are human convention. Do you ever encounter numbers in real life? Have you seen a number? What does it look like? Well, most things may be. But if you say most things are relative, you're basically agreeing with Plato. Then the question just becomes which things are relative and which things are not. However, if you say all things are relative, everything is just a matter of opinion, then the question here would be, well, your own opinion that all things are just an opinion. Now that is not an opinion then, is it? It's the truth. That's what you are saying. Because Otherwise, if you agree that it's just an opinion, you're contradicting yourself. You're saying, basically, maybe I'm wrong too. Okay, this is Plato's answer to that anyway. What do you mean from another plane? Well, that's what some people may claim, but do you think they are? Like today, scientists would definitely disagree with that. They would say, no, there is no parallel world. Numbers are just numbers. They're human conventions which we are using. Like, I have two objects, I call them two. The two objects are true, but whether there is such thing as two, that depends on, whether you believe it or not. Whether they exist in parallel universe, now that is a very, very big question. Okay. So he was rejecting sense experience. He was saying that empiricists claim that we derive all our knowledge from sense experience, and the word empiria in Greek, that is experience, right? But he's saying, well, sense perception only gives us world of constant change. Remember the one Heraclitus described? He says you cannot step into the same river twice. And that's true, you cannot. So I can only say how things appear to me. It appears to me that Socrates is sitting, but not how they really are. Objects of knowledge must be something universal that we can capture in unchanging definition. We should be able to give a definition of, for example, what is justice. Exactly what Socrates was trying to do. And Plato says, yes, we should be able to do that. And then it's no longer a matter of convention. Then it is this true reality. We will see how he answered it. But let's get to the reading now. And let's see if you guys did it and if you can get extra credit. So back to the reading. The reading begins with Socrates. It's a typical Socratic dialogue. He talks to, first, remember the old man, Cephalus. What is going on there? What is Socrates, what is Cephalus telling him? The old man Cephalus. He says, I'm not afraid to die. Why is he not afraid to die? He owes no debts. Yes, exactly. He's saying, I'm a wealthy man. Okay, this I'll give you an extra credit. Okay, you have 5 now. Good job. So he says, I'm a wealthy man, so I'm quite fortunate about that. I don't owe anybody anything. I lived honorable life. I have no debts. Precisely. So Socrates then picks up on that and saying, so do you think justice then is to pay everyone what is owed and basically return whatever you borrowed from other people? And he says, yes, I think that's what it is. And then Socrates poses the first problem with this definition. He says, well, suppose somebody gave you a weapon or an axe, and then they went insane. Are you supposed to give it back to them? Like, this insane person, he can hurt other people, right? If you give it back to him. So it can't be that you just pay it back, can you? At that point, if you noticed, the old man is actually getting out of the conversation. He doesn't want to argue, so he's like, okay, I'm going to quit here. But his nephew picks up and starts arguing for him. And he actually answers that. How does he answer that? Well, kind of, but he is actually, he makes it sound a little more general. He's saying that you should give them back what is appropriate to them. This is basically even says right here. So it's not appropriate to give an insane person a weapon. But it is appropriate to give a healthy person whatever you borrowed from him. Therefore, you should not just give anything to everybody. You should go give everybody what is appropriate for them to be given. And he also, remember, he actually brings the authority of Homer and Simonides. And he is saying, that's what they were saying. Give benefits to your friends and give injuries to your enemies. This is the old Homeric values. Remember those Homeric values that warrior and noble people supposed to follow? Injure your enemies and reward your friends. Give everybody what is appropriate. Your friend, give him good things. Your enemy, you give him bad things. But Socrates has an answer to this too. What does he say is the problem with that? They could be mistaken. Yeah, that's part of it too. Like, you can be wrong about that. You can think somebody is your friend, but he can turn out to be an enemy, and vice versa. But then he also makes even better point about this. He's saying, well, in a matter of fact, if you're doing some sort of a bad thing to somebody, are they becoming better or are they becoming worse? Remember, he's saying, like, if you want the horse to become better, are you treating it badly or are you treating it well? And the answer is, of course, you will do good things to the horse, you will treat her well. And he's saying, so if you want the bad people to become better, are you supposed to treat them well? Are you supposed to treat them badly? And the answer to this is, you're supposed to treat them well. Actually, if you injure them, if you treat them badly, they'll become even worse. So you're going to be contradicting yourself. You're going to make your enemies even worse. And then he says, maybe the solution then is to treat everybody good. Your friends and your enemies. Yes, that's exactly where he eventually gets with this. He's saying, justice, according to you and Homer and Simonides, is apparently a kind of art of stealing, but is the view of helping one's friends and harming one's enemies. The stealing is, remember the conversation about the money, how you only, just person is only good if you give him money to keep and completely useless for anything else. So anyway, but he's saying that that's not the right way to approach that. Well, I guess, but I mean, yeah, you do know their true colors. But Socrates would say you still should always do good things for everybody. You should not harm anybody, because that's just wrong to begin with. He's saying that if we treat humans badly, they become worse. Yes, eventually that's part of the broader picture towards the end of the dialogue. That's true. He is kind of makes this point at the very end. We will get to it eventually, but I'm just going step by step through the entire dialogue so that you guys would remember it if you read it and figure out what was going on. He's not jumping right there. He's actually kind of methodically laying it out. Yeah, it can come back to you and so on. So he's saying that there is such standard of human excellence. In Greek, this is the word arete. It is translated as virtue. However, it's not exactly virtue. There's a problem with this translation. What is the problem with this translation? Well, in Greek, we talk about arete about not just about human beings, but about objects too. For example, a knife. A good knife which cuts bread good, we're saying it has arete. Arete of a knife is to be able to cut well. You can't say in English it's a virtue of a knife. It doesn't even make any sense, right? But in Greek they were saying it is arete. So a human being also has his own human arete, which is human excellence or human virtue, which makes him kind of better human being. And that's the idea here. But this is what arete is. So what was arete for Homer? For Homer, arete was this warrior hero. Success, honor, power, wealth, moderation, security, courage, loyalty, and patriotism. This is why he was supposed to treat enemies badly, right? Because if you are a warrior, how are you supposed to treat your enemies? Badly. You're supposed to kill them, right? That's what warriors do. Socrates actually changes the meaning of arete. He is saying that arete is pursuing the good. You're supposed to pursue the good. And he's saying there is such thing as the good, and you're supposed to pursue it. In particular, we have to be able to reach the correct judgment regarding what the good is. We must understand what is the good in order for us to pursue it, right? So what exactly is the good for a human being in particular? And this is kind of where it gets to more about a just man and what is the just man. According to Socrates, it is not a property of a just man to treat anyone badly, because he is pursuing the good. And this is where they kind of have the Thrasymachus to interfere with this conversation. Thrasymachus was sitting there, right? And then what does he say? By the way, Thrasymachus is an actual name of the actual sophist. One of the sophists, well-known sophists of the period, was named Thrasymachus. Whether or not he ever had a conversation with Socrates, we do not know, but he could have, and he held actually this kind of a view. So what does he say? Give me at least the gist of his saying. Yeah, okay. Lisa, you are getting another extra credit for this. Yes, he explodes, right? And he's like, oh, this is such a nonsense. For God's sake, Socrates, stop talking all this, becoming good. What? This is just doing what is in the interest of those in power. This is what justice is. So this is where we have a classic example of Socratic dialectic. So Socrates says, okay, so your definition of justice then is justice means doing what is in the interest of those in power. And Thrasymachus says, yes, this is exactly what it is. Doing what is in the interests of those in power. And Socrates then keeps on kind of developing it and says, okay, so to be just then is to obey the laws of those in power, right? They give us some laws because they are in power. They are lawmakers. And by following these laws, we are just. And Thrasymachus says, yes, basically that's the gist of it, right? Those in power themselves do whatever they want. But when we follow the laws and when we are being just, we are just being like suckers, basically. They are taking advantage of us. This is what it is. And then Socrates says, okay, but do you agree that those in power make mistakes? Right? They make mistakes sometimes. Thrasymachus says, I suppose they sometimes do. And Socrates says, all right, so those in power may mistakenly make laws that are not in their interest. Is it not true? And Thrasymachus says, well, I suppose it's possible. And then Socrates says, so to obey the laws which, such laws, the mistaken laws, is not to act in the interest of those in power. And Thrasymachus says, yeah, all right. So note that then they reach this kind of contradiction. And Socrates says, okay, therefore to be just is to do what is in the interest of those in power, but when you obey the laws which are mistaken, to be just is to do what is not in the interest of those in power. Right? So this is a contradiction. What is Thrasymachus' answer to this? He has actually an answer, a pretty good answer to this. Although he is very annoyed by Socrates at this point, and saying this is all this trickery you are so known for. But no, he does not agree with Socrates. He actually found a loophole. He found a loophole in this, and the loophole is the following. He's saying, when those in power make the mistakes, they are not truly the rulers. They are not truly the powerful. As the powerful people, as the rulers, quote unquote, they never make mistakes. That is his answer to this. Yeah, he's saying that the ruler, to the extent that he is the ruler, does not make mistakes. So what is it to be a true ruler? They are starting talking about, again, using the Greek term tekne. Tekne is essentially art or skill. And they are saying that there is, art or skill to every profession, to seek out to provide what is good for each person, in a sense. So I mentioned a medical doctor, right? A physician who pursues health, and he does things to get people healthy. And compare that to the ruler, who also does things, in a sense, in his capacity as the ruler. So if physician makes a mistake and his patient gets sicker than he was before, he is not doing the job of a physician. As a physician, he's supposed to make him better. But similarly as a ruler, the true ruler does not make mistakes. And then Socrates actually again turns it around and says, okay, wait a minute. But what is a techne of the ruler? What is he supposed to do? And Thrasymachus says, benefit himself, of course. And Socrates disagrees. He says, no, wait a minute. That's not true at all. He's supposed to benefit the people he is ruling. That is his job. It's like a doctor is not treating patients to benefit himself. He is eventually getting paid for it. But the point there is to treat the patient. And he is comparing the ruler also to the shepherd. He's saying he's like a shepherd who is taking care of his sheep. He is not taking care of himself. He's supposed to take care of the sheep. A true ruler, actually is supposed to benefit the weak, because the weak, those are the people he is in charge of. He is stronger than them only in as much as he is actually taking care of them. If he is not taking care of them, then he doesn't have arete. The arete of the ruler would be the benefit of those he rules. So this is kind of where we get again closer to the society. And of course Thrasymachus disagrees. He again disagrees with that. He is saying injustice is very profitable. He's saying you're wrong about justice. Just people generally are taken advantage of all the time. By being just, they are just opening themselves up to all sorts of manipulation. Unjust people, on the other hand, they are the one who reap all the rewards, because they are the happy ones. Why are they the happy ones? They have the money, they have the power, they have anything they want. They are not following those laws. They are making up these laws themselves. So being just that's why it is in their interest. Because when you are just, you're just letting them to manipulate you. You're letting them to do whatever they want with you. Whereas unjust person does whatever he or she wants and basically achieves success, achieves happiness. The life of the unjust is much better than the life of the just. Now Socrates, of course, disagrees with that. Okay, let's have a little bit of a discussion now, because this is a relevant topic even today. Do you agree with Thrasymachus that the strong always gets the better piece of the pie, and hence the happier? I think unfortunately yes. Like they do get the bigger piece of the pie. The question though, are they happier because of this? Okay, yeah. So that's essentially what the question is about. Does it make you happier when you have more money? Or are there other things which are, if not equally, then even more important? Yeah, you may say kind of a survival of the fittest, or like the benefit of the strongest. So the stronger you are, the more you can take advantage of other people, and therefore you are happy. The question here is now, does this make you happy? Being taking advantage of other people? Power, money, you may say that money is power and power is money. Happiness is a choice, not a destination. That's an interesting way to put it. Well, power isn't always money, but money, I would say, pretty much is about power. At least a lot of money, right? I guess if you have a little bit of money, you can buy something with it. I don't know if it gives you power. But if you have billions, that is power. That essentially is what it is. You're not even going to spend all this money, but you do have power in the sense that other people will do what you want. You make them do what you want because you pay them, right? You can pay them, and they'll be like cleaning your house, cooking you meals, doing whatever else you want. There are, of course, limits to what you can buy with money. You can't buy love, right? But you can buy lots of things. And power can make you feel happy, or can you? Well, this is obviously where Socrates would disagree. Do you think this is how things should be? Or do you think that ideally we should have a society where it's not about power and it's not about money? Well, money can afford therapy, yeah. But, of course, the deeper question here may be, is there any way to be happy without the therapy? Maybe there's like something else which can make you happy. Now, note that being happier and being happy is not exactly the same thing, right? You can always be a little bit happier than you were, but overall you can still be miserable. In the same time, to say I am happy, as in I'm generally so pleased with my life, that's a different statement. Almost anybody can say, yeah, I'm a little bit happy about that. That cup of coffee made me a little bit happier, but does it mean you are a happy man? No, I'm totally miserable. Well, you can seek a hobby, but this is more of a question about being just and unjust, I suppose. And Thrasymachus was saying, an unjust person who is strong in his injustice is also a happy person. So if we take a political leader, for example, who achieved whatever he wanted by being unjust, by committing some sort of crimes, Thrasymachus would say he is very happy because he achieved what he wanted. But Socrates would say no, that is actually not true, because justice, just life, is in itself a reward which is more important than money or power. The just life is reward in itself. Well, that actually is going to be picked up next time, because this conversation goes on and on and on. The entire Republic is about that. This is just the first dialogue. They kind of pose this question, and it's an interesting question. Well, of course you can live more comfortable life. Most definitely. But the comforts, whether the comforts is what makes you happy, or whether the justice. Now, note that you can be just and still have money. Ideally, that should be the goal. But if you have this kind of a choice, which, by the way, like next reading will be about that, when you just, suppose you have a choice, and the choice is this: you will have a lot of money, but you will be totally unjust, or you will be just and have no money. And you have to pick one. And there's no way around it. Now, which one would you pick, and which one would make you happier? Well, are the poor lower class more just or not? Now, if we say that they are, because, being poor doesn't necessarily mean being virtuous. You can be poor and a criminal or something. And plenty of criminals are quite poor because they commit all these crimes, they rape and murder, then they go to jail. I don't think they are very happy, are they? So in the same time, there are some poor people who are more virtuous and always keep their word, always return what is owed, follow the laws, and so on. So just being poor doesn't necessarily put you into any one of these categories. As hopefully same with being wealthy. Hopefully one would hope that there are some wealthy people who actually are just. I don't know if it's possible, but theoretically it could be. Especially if they're born into money, right? If they never actually had to do anything, you're born with a lot of money. Can you be virtuous? Well, probably. I mean, you can give to charity and so on and still enjoy the money you have, and you can do something good and productive with your life, again, using this money. or you can become a politician, and then who knows what will happen. Of course they are important. Yes, the money and connections are always important. Now, again, the question is, how far can you go for money and connection? Are you supposed to have some sort of morals, which you will say, okay, this is something I'm not going to do, even though it will give me more money and better connections? Or you should be just like, this is all relative anyway. There is no truth. There is no morality. It's whatever. If nobody knows about it, I can lie, cheat, and steal all I want. If that gets me somewhere, wonderful. To note that this is, of course, a very different attitude. This is the whole, again, essence of the Republic, this question about whether or not we can achieve better life by being unjust and committing bad things, or whether or not it's impossible. And if you do bad things and being unjust, that fundamentally damages in you in such a way that no money will ever restore your happiness. Your happiness is gone. And you may be very wealthy and you may be very powerful, but you will not be happy anymore. Well, hopefully, yeah. Okay, let's look a little bit more at what was happening there. So Socrates says, in the end, he brings this very, very good example, which kind of, again, takes it further towards a collective work more than an individual work. And he's saying, well, suppose a group of unjust people want to achieve some sort of result. Like a group of gangsters want to rob a bank. Can they do it if they are unjust to each other? And Thrasymachus agrees that no, they cannot. Because they have to be at least just to each other. They must be at least fair to each other. Otherwise, they will never be able to do anything together. In fact, any group of people, if this group of people wants to achieve anything, they have to be just to each other. They have to follow the certain rules. Like even if you look at the mafia, for example, right? They have their own unwritten rules, and they are following them very strictly. That's the only way they can achieve stuff. And you can say this is a type of justice for them. If you break your word, if you snitch or something, they punish you, and so on. And this is their form of justice. If they are unjust to each other, if there's no standards amongst them, just like this strong person we're talking about has no standards whatsoever, then they will never be able to function. They will collapse. The whole thing will collapse. They'll just cheat on each other all the time. To be just, well, if there's such thing as justice, then of course you can practice justice to some and injustice to each other, to others. There's a further question whether it will make you a just person, and the answer is probably not, because if you are selectively just, then you're not really just. But yeah, of course you can be selectively just. It's just like with other sins, like murder. Murderer doesn't murder everybody, right? He only murders some people. But does it make him any less of a murderer? No, he still is a murderer. Same thing with justice. If you're only just to some people and unjust to others, of course overall you are unjust. But that kind of proves the point that justice is a good thing, because justice is what makes people achieve stuff. You cannot achieve stuff with injustice. And that is a big point there. If you want to live as a society, you have to be just. And this is, otherwise it will produce discord and nothing will ever be achieved. So again, this term arete is related in Greek language to another term ergon, and they talk about it in the end of the conversation when again Socrates talks about this ergon characteristic function, and he's saying ergon of the eyes is to see, ergon of the ears is to hear, right? Ergon of a knife is to cut. Arete, on the other hand, of the eyes would be to see well, and arete of the ears would be to hear well. So what is the ergon of the soul? The one characteristic of the soul? To live, living, right? Just like ergon of the eyes is to see, characteristic of the soul, characteristic activity of the soul would be to live. So what is arete of the soul? To live well. Just like to see well is arete of the eyes. Now, for Plato, the question what is just is closely connected to what is good, and he's saying the good is the rational end of our action. We supposed to go towards the good. This is the ultimate goal. What is the good? For human beings, we can say happiness is the ultimate goal, right? Eudaimonia in Greek. And we use the term eudaimonism, a view that a good life is a happy life. If you're happy, that's what ultimately matters there. So the important question though is to select this good correctly, to know what is the good, what will make you happy. Will money make you happy or some other things? And this is like important in order for us to figure out how to live this life. Happiness must be attained by the pursuit of virtue, according to Plato and Socrates, because I'm sure he got it from Socrates. Becoming like God, in a sense, as much as God as possible, because God is the good, and as the more we are like God, the more good we are, the closer we are to this ideal. Well, but there still should be a further point than that, right? You're learning things for what? What is the ultimate goal? You just learn, and then you die? Seems kind of self-defeating, right? You learned everything and you died. Yeah, there's a very high bar. But he's not saying we will achieve that. He's saying we should strive towards it. You know, the goal doesn't have to be achievable, but it has to be there. So the truly virtuous man is the truly good man, and he is also a truly happy man. And this is the same person essentially. The more he is like God, the more his soul is like God's soul, the happier he will be. Now, in terms of knowledge, it's kind of starting to introduce. So pretty much all of this is from Socrates, and this first dialogue is probably the way Socrates was talking about it. Plato himself takes it further because he tries to really figure out what's behind all this. So knowledge. Beliefs can be true or false, but that's not good enough. You have to have reason in order to truly understand the reality, to get to the bottom of things, to get to the bottom of the truth. The true knowledge, according to Plato, should follow these requirements. First of all, it should be objective. It cannot be like true for you, false for me, or true for me, false for you. No, it should be true for everybody, objective. Unavailable to the senses. He thinks that the senses cannot give us true knowledge. This is only reason, like 2 + 2 = 4. That's true knowledge. But whatever depends on the senses, that's not true knowledge. It's knowledge of some sort, but not a true knowledge. It should be universal. It should apply to everybody, everywhere, at all times. Unchanging. It should not change. And grounded in rational understanding. Very high bar, right? In fact, it's hard to think what other than 2 + 2 = 4 can even qualify. But actually, he does find something. He talks about a particular feature of reality. We'll talk about mainly next time, but this is just kind of an introduction. So look at all these dogs. What common quality, what is it that you see in them which makes you call them dogs? Fur. So my cat is also a dog. My cat has a tail. Well, canine is just another name for a dog. You're basically just explaining it by saying a dog is a dog. I know it's a dog. What makes it a dog? That's the question. They can bark. I can assure you sometimes it sounds like my cat barks. Also, think of a dog which lost her voice. It cannot bark. Well, it's no longer a dog. But what's a DNA? DNA doesn't tell you if it's a dog. It's the other way around. We know it's a dog, and we can figure out the DNA and say it's a DNA of a dog. But to call it a dog, DNA is not good enough. And in fact, do you perform DNA analysis every time you want to find out whether it's a dog? I'm sure they called certain animals dogs way before they even knew about DNA. So any best friend of a human would be a dog? Okay, well, it is kind of a tricky question in a sense. But do you guys all agree that there is certain quality in all of them which we can look at and say it is a dog? And if we look at, there was, for example, a picture of a cat there, we would say, well, this one there is not a dog, but the rest of them are dogs. And you don't need to perform DNA analysis or even hear them bark. They're not barking now, are they? But you can already say, well, you also don't see their bone structure here. But we all agree this is all dogs, right? Does anybody think any one of them is not a dog? I don't know. All of this, you can find it in other animals. Again, yeah, wolves are rather similar. So, yeah, there you go. Okay, well, we're not going to concentrate on it too much. The idea, though, is there is something in common. And this something is why we look at them and we call them dogs. And if there was a picture of a chair, we would not call it a dog. But if there are pictures of several chairs, we could call them a chair. And like this picture, if you look at them, what's common between them? And well, just so that you would not speculate too much, I can tell you. Would you call both of them beautiful? Yes, okay. So what does it make them beautiful? What is this quality which makes them beautiful? Art? Well, art produces beautiful things from what we perceive as beautiful, not the other way around, right? Art doesn't tell us what is beautiful. We create art based on our idea of beauty. But we do have an idea of beauty. We have some sort of understanding of what is beautiful and what is ugly. What are we judging it against? How do we do that? Now, there's another thing with like circularity. This is the stuff on the board, and you can look at it and you can say, is this circular? No, right? This is not circular. How about this one? Yes, this one is circular. So what does it make it circular and this one not circular? What is the circularity? So this is kind of what Plato is, well, what's the roundness? What Plato means when he starts talking about forms. He's saying there are forms for all these things, and they are like this standard, right? Particulars and universals. Every instance of a beautiful thing is particular. Every instance of a circular thing is circular. But there's such thing as a universal, circularity, or beauty. And beauty itself, or circularity itself, is a form. What is a form? Now that is one thing very specific to Plato's philosophy. A form is a type of an entity which is ultimately true. There is a form of beauty, there is a form of a dog, there is a form of circularity, and you can't even say where they are, because sometimes he calls them ideas, but they are not ideas in the sense that they are fully mental. This is some sort of extra reality. It's not part of this world, yet this is the only true things. And we only measure everything, for example, what is just, by comparing it to the ideal form of justice, which exists somewhere, but not in this world. So this is where Plato already introduces his own teaching, that we don't think that Socrates ever thought about it this way, but Plato does. He's saying this is what Socrates was looking for. He was looking for these forms. Okay, we will talk more about them next time. By the way, yeah, like the idea of recollection, he also picks it up, and he's saying that's why Plato called himself a midwife of ideas, because they already are in us. We just need to help people bring them up. Thank you, and do the reading for next time. I'll put it up. It kind of continues the story. And hopefully more of you guys can do it. Hopefully you will see how it's nice and rewarding to discuss it if you know what you are talking about. Anyway, thank you. That's it for today.